The Hale family lodge was built for stories. Its stone walls had heard generations of triumphs and betrayals, toasts and tears. On Christmas Eve, under the soft glow of candlelight, it was meant to hold warmth. But that night, Nora Bennett Hale, 6 months pregnant, stood at the upstairs landing with a hand resting over her belly. She wasn't listening to the holiday carols rising from the grand piano. She wasn't watching the cousins in reindeer sweaters run circles around the tree. She was listening to her own heartbeat, steady and strong, as if telling her, "Stay calm, but stay ready." Her husband, Gregory Hale, had promised her years of devotion. He had promised stability, partnership, and a place in his powerful family's empire. But last night she had received the kind of proof no woman should ever have to see. A hotel receipt, a careless text, a lipstick stain. Gregory wasn't with his clients in Aspen. He was with Lila Summers, the event planner he had once described as just ambitious. The truth had a scent, cheap perfume mixed with arrogance, and Gregory carried it home with him at dawn. He thought she wouldn't notice. He thought she would smile through dinner, play the loyal wife, and keep his secrets. But Nora had a secret of her own. She wasn't going to break. Not tonight. The downstairs dining room glittered with silverware polished so perfectly it could cut. Evelyn Hale, the matriarch, had set the long table herself, insisting on rosemary sprigs by each napkin and cranberry bowls by the candles. "Presentation matters," she had said. But when Nora walked in, what mattered wasn't the table. It was the envelope in her hand, cream-colored, heavy, waiting. Greg was already there. He was the kind of man who filled a room with laughter, even when that laughter was hollow. His navy blazer was crisp, his smile charming, his hand gestures broad. He made jokes about holiday bonuses, bragged about a new Aspen chalet, and winked at his father as if the whole world belonged to him. It was the same arrogance that had driven him into Lila's arms. The family gathered: Peter Hale, stern and status-obsessed; Thomas, Greg's older brother with quiet, watchful eyes; Mia, Thomas's wife, warm and intuitive; Pastor Jonah, family friend who always opened dinners with prayer. Children giggled as Evelyn rang the old brass bell to silence the room. Nora slid into her seat, smoothing the fabric of her green maternity dress. Her heart wasn't racing anymore. It was slowing, steadying, bracing itself. Greg leaned toward her, his voice a hushed hiss. "Smile. Don't ruin this night." Nora turned her head, looked him directly in the eye, and whispered, "Watch me." When Pastor Jonah finished his blessing, glasses lifted in unison. Greg raised his wine high. "To family, to truth," Nora said, her voice clear. She placed the envelope on the table runner where every candlelight flickered against it. "To truth, because it always comes out." The room shifted. A few cousins exchanged glances. Evelyn's silver eyebrows lifted just slightly. Greg chuckled nervously. "Honey, what are you doing?" Nora pushed the envelope closer to the center of the table. "Inside are divorce papers, because last night, while you said you were working late, you were at the Mariner Hotel with Lila Summers, room 804. The receipt is in there. So is the champagne order at midnight." The silence that followed wasn't just silence, it was a vacuum, sucking the warmth out of the candles, pressing against every chest. Forks froze, glasses trembled in hands. Peter Hale slammed a palm on the table. "Gregory?" Greg laughed, too loud, too forced. "She's hormonal, she doesn't know what she's saying." But his phone betrayed him. It lit up on the table, buzzing, glowing blue across the linen. One name, one preview message. "Can't stop thinking about you." Last night was... The screen went dark again. A collective gasp passed through the table. Evelyn's hand, lined with age but steady as ever, reached for the envelope. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She simply rested her hand on it like a seal. "Sit down, Gregory," she said. Her voice was velvet over steel. Greg's mask cracked. "Mother, this isn't how we handle family matters. Not like this. Not at dinner." "Then when?" Thomas interrupted, his calm voice cutting sharper than any shout. He turned to Nora. "I'll call your lawyer tonight. You won't face this alone." Nora exhaled, a release she hadn't realized she was holding. For months she had lived in shadows, wondering if anyone in this family would see her. Now Thomas had spoken, and the silence that followed was no longer hostile. It was protective. Greg's jaw worked furiously. His pride flared, but before he could speak, the doorbell rang. 3 sharp chimes. Everyone turned. Evelyn frowned. Who could that be on Christmas Eve? Greg leapt from his chair almost too quickly. "Oh, it's just something I arranged. A surprise. For the family." He smoothed his blazer, checked his reflection in the glass cabinet, and strode to the door. When he opened it, the winter air swept in, carrying with it snowflakes that glittered like tiny knives. And standing there in a red coat, heels clicking against the porch stone, holding a glossy bag like she was delivering presents, was Lila Summers. Her smile was bright. Her eyes scanned the room with an assumption that she belonged. "Merry Christmas, everyone," she sang. The family gasped. Children fell silent. Peter's face turned to stone. Evelyn didn't move. Nora didn't flinch. She lifted her chin, hand still resting over her belly. "You're just in time," she said softly. Greg swallowed, his confidence slipping. Evelyn picked up the old brass bell and rang it once. The sharp, commanding note filled the dining room. "We will hear her," Evelyn said, never breaking her gaze from her son. The candles flickered. The snow whispered against the windows. And Nora, steady as stone, prepared for the truth to finally break wide open. Nora Bennett Hale was not born into the glittering halls of power where the Hale family lived. She grew up in a small New England town where winters were long, neighbors borrowed sugar from one another, and birthdays were celebrated with homemade cakes. Her parents, James and Lorraine Bennett, were school teachers who believed in discipline, honesty, and kindness. They taught Nora to live simply, to work hard, and to believe that love, when given freely, was the most valuable currency of all. From the start, Nora was different from the other girls in her town. While some dreamed of marrying rich and leaving behind the quiet streets, Nora dreamed of healing. She wanted to be a nurse. She wanted to be there for people on the hardest nights of their lives, and she made it happen. She worked double shifts at the local diner through high school, earned scholarships, and eventually graduated from nursing school with honors. By 25, she was working in a maternity ward, holding the hands of women as they brought life into the world. It was in that ward, late one snowy evening, that she first met Gregory Hale. Greg had come to visit a business partner's wife who had gone into early labor. He walked into the hospital like he owned it, his charm filling the halls. At first, Nora barely noticed him, but he noticed her. Later, he confessed he was struck not by her beauty, though she had that in quiet abundance, but by the way she spoke to a frightened mother, calming her with nothing more than a steady hand and a patient voice. Greg pursued her relentlessly. Flowers. Dinners in restaurants where she felt too small in her thrift store dresses. Promises of a life where she would never again have to count pennies or skip meals to pay bills. At first, she resisted. Men like Gregory Hale belonged to a world so different from hers, a world of marble floors and family legacies that stretched back generations. But he was persistent, and he was persuasive. He told her he needed her, not for what she had, but for who she was. She believed him. When they married, Nora gave up the night shifts at the hospital. She believed she was stepping into a new kind of calling. To be Greg's partner, his anchor, the woman who would remind him of kindness when the world demanded ruthlessness. And in the beginning, she thought she succeeded. But life inside the Hale family mansion was nothing like she imagined. Peter Hale, Greg's father, looked at her as though she were a guest who had overstayed her welcome. Evelyn was kinder but reserved, weighing every word Nora spoke. The family spoke in the language of balance sheets and boardrooms, and Nora, used to the simple honesty of small-town life, often felt like she was listening to a code she could never quite crack. She smiled through dinners. She kept quiet when the conversation turned to business. She pretended not to hear the whispers that she was the nurse who got lucky, and she buried the sting of isolation beneath the belief that Greg loved her, and that was enough. Then came the pregnancy. For Nora, it was the miracle she had always dreamed of. For Greg, it seemed to be an inconvenience. He congratulated her, kissed her forehead, and within days was back to long nights away, back to phone calls she wasn't supposed to overhear. But Nora endured. She decorated the nursery alone. She kept working on her baby journal, writing letters to the little life inside her about hope and family and faith. She convinced herself that once Greg held their child, once he saw what they had created, everything would change. Until last night. When the text message lit up her phone, Nora's hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped it. Last night was a dream. Can't wait for more. She stared at the name, Lila Summers. A woman she had met once at a company gala. A woman with sharp laughter and sharper eyes. Nora had wanted to believe Lila was harmless. Now she knew better. She could have broken down then. Many women would have. But Nora was not like many women. She had grown up watching her mother carry her father through years of illness without ever losing dignity. She had held the hands of mothers in pain and watched them summon strength they didn't know they had. And in that moment, something inside Nora hardened into resolve. She would not beg. She would not weep in silence. She would not allow Greg to write the story of her life. That was why tonight, in front of the entire family, she placed those papers on the table. She was not only confronting Greg, she was reclaiming herself. But what the family did not know, what even Greg himself had overlooked, was that Nora was not as powerless as she appeared. For while she had given up her career, she had never given up her skill. Quietly, without telling anyone, she had been working part-time shifts at a small clinic downtown. She had saved her earnings, little by little, tucked away in an account under her maiden name. It wasn't much, but it was hers. And she had an ally. Thomas Hale, Greg's older brother, had always treated her differently. He noticed when she was left out of conversations. He spoke to her with respect, never condescension. And though he had never intervened openly, Nora had caught the looks he gave Greg. The silent disapproval, the warnings Greg never heeded. Thomas had power in this family, and tonight, for the first time, he had chosen to use it on her behalf. When he said, "You won't face this alone," Nora felt the shift in the room. For the first time in years, she wasn't isolated. She had a voice beside hers. But the night was far from over. Because as Lila stepped into that room in her red coat, smiling as though she had been invited, Nora knew this confrontation was only the beginning. Evelyn had said, "We will hear her." But hearing Lila's voice was one thing. Allowing her to sit at the family table was another. The Hale family was about to witness more than a scandal. They were about to witness a reckoning. And Nora, quiet, small-town Nora, was ready to lead it. Then Lila set down her glossy bag on the table, looked directly at Nora, and said with a smirk, "I think your seat belongs to me now." Snow fell in heavy curtains outside the Hale lodge, wrapping the world in silence while inside. The family dining room buzzed with a tension so sharp it could slice glass. Christmas Eve was supposed to be sacred. It was supposed to be laughter, music, and clinking glasses. But tonight the air was thick with betrayal. Every candle casting shadows that seemed to whisper secrets. Nora sat at the long mahogany table, her hands steady over her belly, her eyes fixed on the woman who had just entered. Lila Summers, young, bold, dressed in a red coat that looked more like provocation than fashion. Her presence at the door wasn't just inappropriate, it was war. Evelyn Hale, matriarch of the family, did not flinch. She still held the brass bell in one hand, its single chime lingering in the air. "We will hear her," she had declared. Her words carried the weight of a gavel, commanding everyone to sit in stunned silence. Greg tried to recover his charm. His laugh came out brittle. "Lila, this isn't the time." But Lila cut him off with a look, the kind of look that claimed territory. She set her glossy bag onto the table as if she belonged there, as if the Hale family home was hers to conquer. "Good evening," she said, her voice sweet but dripping with triumph. "I thought I'd bring something for the holiday." She slid a small box from her bag and placed it beside Nora's envelope. "After all, Christmas is about gifts, isn't it?" A murmur rippled through the table. Peter Hale leaned forward, his jaw tight. "Gregory," he growled, "explain this." Greg's face flushed. He glanced at Nora, then at his mother, then at his mistress. He was a man cornered, trapped by his own arrogance. "It's nothing," he insisted. She misunderstood the invitation, but Nora's voice cut clear through his lie. No, she understood perfectly. The tension rose like smoke. Thomas Hale shifted in his chair, his eyes narrowing at his brother. He had always known Greg's flaws, always suspected darker truths, but seeing them exposed so openly in front of the family was a wound to the Hale name. Lila, unbothered, slipped off her coat and draped it across the back of a chair. Underneath, her dress shimmered in sequins, cut far too daring for a family dinner. She turned to Nora with a smile that wasn't a smile at all. "You look lovely," she said softly, her eyes flicking to Nora's pregnant belly. "Radiant, really. Must be exhausting, though, carrying all that weight alone." It was a jab, meant to pierce. The room stiffened, waiting for Nora to shatter. But Nora didn't break. She lifted her glass of water, sipped slowly, and set it down. "It's heavy," she said calmly, "but at least I carry it with dignity." The subtle strike landed harder than any shout. Evelyn's lips twitched, almost approvingly. The family sat on edge, torn between tradition and scandal. The Christmas tree sparkled in the corner, ornaments gleaming like witnesses. The smell of rosemary and roasted meat hung in the air, but no one tasted anything anymore. Pastor Jonah cleared his throat, breaking the unbearable quiet. "Christmas is about truth," he said softly. "And truth is knocking on this table tonight. The question is, who here has the courage to answer?" Greg shoved back his chair, his voice rising. "This is insane. We are not doing this in front of everyone." Thomas's voice was level, firm. "You already did. You brought it here the moment you brought her into your life." Greg glared at his brother. "You always wanted to see me fail. Admit it." "I wanted to see you be a man," Thomas replied. The brother's words cracked like thunder in the still room. Meanwhile, Lila leaned closer to Nora, her tone venom wrapped in velvet. "You think you've won something by waving papers? Do you really believe walking away makes you stronger?" Nora turned to her fully, her voice steady. "No. What makes me stronger is knowing I don't need scraps from another woman's table to feel whole." Gasps circled the room. Mia, Thomas's wife, pressed a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. Even the children, sensing the shift, fell silent in their chairs. Greg's composure unraveled. He slammed his fist against the table, rattling silverware. "Enough." But Evelyn's hand shot out, her frail fingers gripping his wrist with surprising force. "You forget yourself, Gregory," she hissed. "This is my house. And tonight, your wife has spoken with more strength than you've ever shown." Greg froze, shocked into silence. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Snow tapped against the windows like a drumbeat, building tension. Nora looked around the table, at the faces of those who had judged her for years. For the first time, she did not see pity or doubt. She saw respect. And then Lila stood. She took the small box she had placed on the table earlier and slid it toward Nora. "Since you like truth so much," she said, her voice sweet and cruel, "open it." The room leaned forward. Nora hesitated, her hand hovering over the lid. She could feel the weight of it, not in ounces but in implications. Evelyn spoke quietly. "You don't have to." But Nora knew she did. She could not shy away now, not when every eye in the room was on her. Slowly, she lifted the lid. Inside lay a photograph, glossy and cruelly intimate. Greg and Lila together in a hotel bed, smiling at the camera as if mocking her. The gasp that followed was not just from Nora. It was from the entire family. Peter pushed back his chair, his face red with fury. Thomas's fists clenched. Mia whispered, "Oh God." Greg lunged forward, trying to snatch the photo, but Nora was quicker. She lifted it high, her voice ringing clear. "This is who you are, Gregory, and now the family sees it too." The photograph trembled in her hand, not from weakness, but from power. For the first time, she was not the silent wife. She was the voice of truth. Lila smirked, as though the humiliation was entertainment. But Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You've disgraced this family, Gregory," she said. "But this woman," she pointed at Nora, "has restored its honor." Greg's face contorted with rage. "You're siding with her? Over your own son?" The matriarch's answer was calm, but sharp as ice. "I am siding with integrity." The words hung in the air like a verdict. And just as Greg's fury reached its peak, a sudden crash echoed from the foyer. The front door, left ajar from Lila's arrival, had swung wide open. Cold wind tore through the hall, snuffing out half the candles in the dining room. A figure stepped inside. The family turned in shock. It wasn't another guest. It wasn't a servant. It was a man in a dark coat, carrying a leather briefcase. His face was unfamiliar to most of the Hales, but not to Nora. It was Carmen Ortiz's associate, the lawyer, and he was here to deliver the next blow. The photograph still shook in Nora's hand, the glossy paper catching the dim light of the candles. Around her, the room was frozen. Some stared with pity, others with disbelief, but all eyes were on her, the woman who had just shattered the illusion of the perfect Hale marriage. Greg's voice cut through the silence, sharp and venomous. "Enough of this performance, Nora. You're embarrassing yourself. Do you think anyone in this room believes you're strong? You're a nobody." A nurse who thought marrying me would make her important. The words landed like daggers. Nora's throat tightened. For months she had braced herself for whispers, but hearing it spoken aloud, in front of everyone, was a cruelty she hadn't expected. Lila leaned against the chair with a smirk, her arms folded as though she'd already won. "He's right," she purred. "You don't belong here. You're playing at being one of them, but you never were. And now, everyone sees it." The shame pressed heavy against Nora's chest. For a moment, the strength she had carried into the room wavered. Her hand trembled, her breath came shallow. The photograph slipped from her grasp and fluttered to the table, face up for all to see. A murmur of voices rose. Mia's eyes shone with sympathy, but she didn't move. Peter Hale rubbed his temples in frustration, muttering about family reputation. Even Evelyn, usually so composed, looked away for the briefest second, and that was when the humiliation cut deepest. Nora realized she was alone again. Her vision blurred as hot tears welled. She pressed a hand to her belly, whispering under her breath as though to the child inside, "I'm so sorry." Her chair scraped back suddenly, the sound echoing like thunder in the silence. She rose to her feet, unsteady, her breath shaking. "I can't." Her voice cracked. "I can't do this anymore." The room erupted. Greg smirked, mistaking her retreat for victory. "That's right," he sneered. "Leave. Take your dramatics with you. This family doesn't need your weakness dragging us down." The cruelty of his tone snapped through the air. Nora's knees buckled slightly, and she grabbed the back of her chair to steady herself. For the first time that evening, the strength she'd fought to hold on to broke. Her tears spilled freely now, and she turned toward the hallway, each step a stumble. The dining room behind her exploded in whispers, but she didn't hear them. All she heard was the sound of her own breath, ragged and heavy, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Thomas stood quickly, as if to follow, but Evelyn's hand pressed lightly against his arm. "Let her," the matriarch whispered. "She must walk this moment herself." Nora reached the grand staircase. The garlands twinkled with tiny white lights, but she didn't see beauty anymore. She saw only betrayal woven into every corner of the house. She gripped the banister, steadying herself as her vision swam. Behind her, Greg's voice still carried, loud and cruel. "You see? She's not strong. She's fragile. I built her life, and now she can't survive without me." Lila's laughter joined his, sharp and cutting. That laughter followed Nora up the stairs like a ghost. She pushed into the guest room at the end of the hall, slamming the door behind her. Inside, the silence was suffocating. She collapsed onto the bed, clutching her belly as sobs tore through her chest. The strength she had displayed downstairs melted away, leaving her bare, raw, and trembling. She whispered through her tears, "Why wasn't I enough?" Her heart cracked with every word. She thought of the years she had given Greg, her loyalty, her sacrifices, her dreams abandoned for his ambition. She thought of the nursery she had decorated alone, the lullabies she had sung to an empty room. And now, in the most sacred season of all, she was nothing more than a spectacle. Downstairs, the storm raged on. Greg raised his glass again, attempting to reclaim control. "Let's end this nonsense," he declared. "She'll calm down. She always does." Lila smirked. "She's never been competition." But Thomas rose from his chair, his face dark with anger. "You disgust me, Gregory," Greg scoffed. "Spare me the lecture, big brother. You've always envied me." "I've pitied you," Thomas corrected sharply. "Because you mistake cruelty for strength." Evelyn's voice rang out like a bell. "Enough! This house will not be a stage for your arrogance." The lawyer who had entered minutes before stood silently, his briefcase resting at his side. He had been waiting for his moment. Now, he stepped forward, placing a hand on the envelope that still lay on the table. "Mrs. Hale asked me to prepare more than divorce papers," he said. His tone was calm, deliberate. "There are documents here that concern not only her, but this entire family business." Gasps circled the table. Greg paled, the color draining from his face. "What documents?" But the lawyer did not answer him. Instead, he opened the briefcase and began arranging files neatly across the table. Upstairs, Nora sat trembling in the quiet, unaware of the storm building below. Her tears had slowed, but her body shook from exhaustion. She whispered to her unborn child, "I'll protect you, no matter what, even if it costs me everything." She closed her eyes just for a moment to breathe, and then she heard it. A soft creak at the door. Her eyes flew open. There, in the dim light, stood Lila Summers, alone, smiling. She closed the door behind her with a quiet click and leaned against it. "You should have stayed downstairs," Lila whispered, her smile widening, "because now it's just you and me." The guest room was dim, lit only by the twinkle of Christmas lights outside the frosted window. Nora sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling over her belly. She hadn't yet wiped the streaks of tears from her face. Her heart still ached from Greg's cruel words, from the laughter that had chased her up the stairs. And now, standing in the doorway, was the source of it all. Lila Summers. The younger woman closed the door behind her with a deliberate click, sealing them in together. She leaned back against the wood as if it were her throne, her lips curved into a smile that wasn't warm at all. "You should have stayed downstairs," Lila whispered, her voice smooth as silk and just as sharp. "At least there, you had an audience. Up here, it's just you and me, no one to clap for your little performance." Nora lifted her chin, though her throat was tight. "What do you want?" Lila walked slowly across the room, her heels clicking against the hardwood. She was in no rush. She wanted Nora to feel every second of the silence, every beat of humiliation. "I want you to stop pretending you're the victim," she said finally. "Greg doesn't love you. He never did. You were convenient. You looked good on his arm until someone better came along. That someone is me." Nora's hand tightened over her belly. "Better?" she said softly. "Is that what you call yourself? A woman who sleeps with another woman's husband?" Lila's smile only widened. "Don't act like you're surprised. Men like Greg always trade up. You should have known your expiration date the moment you walked into this family." She circled the bed, like a predator watching prey. "You're weak, Nora. Fragile. Everyone saw it tonight." Nora swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "If I'm so weak, why are you here? Why do you need to tell me this face to face?" For a moment, the question pierced through Lila's confidence. Her eyes flickered, but she quickly masked it. She leaned closer, her voice dropping into a hiss. "Because I want you to understand something. This isn't just about Greg. This is about everything. The house, the money, the reputation. Once you're gone, all of it will be mine." Nora shook her head, her tears returning. "You think the Hales will ever accept you? They saw you tonight. You walked in here like a thief." "Thieves take what they want," Lila said coldly, "and I always get what I want." The words echoed in the room. Nora felt the walls closing in again, the weight of betrayal pressing against her chest. For a moment, she thought she might crumble once more. But then, something inside her shifted. She stood, slowly, her body trembling, but her gaze steady. "You're wrong," she whispered. "You may have Greg's attention now. You may even think you have his love, but you don't have his respect. And you never will." Lila's smirk faltered. "What did you just say?" Nora stepped closer, their faces now only inches apart. "You think winning a man like Greg is a prize? It's not. It's a burden, because men who betray once betray again, and one day he'll do to you what he's done to me." For the first time, Lila's confidence cracked. Her eyes narrowed, her lips tightening into a thin line. But then she laughed, a short, bitter laugh. "Maybe, but by then, I'll have what I need, and you'll be nothing. Alone, forgotten." Nora's chest ached. She wanted to scream, to throw Lila out, to call Evelyn upstairs and expose her right then and there. But her body betrayed her. A sudden sharp pain shot across her stomach, stealing her breath. She gasped, clutching at her belly, staggering back toward the bed. Lila's eyes widened in surprise. What's happening?" Nora sank to her knees, her face pale. "The baby," she whispered, panic lacing her voice. "Something's wrong." For a moment, just a moment, fear flickered across Lila's face. But then she froze. She didn't move to help. She didn't reach for the door. She just stood there, watching. Nora struggled to steady her breathing, forcing herself not to collapse. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "Help me." Lila tilted her head, her eyes cold. "Why should I?" The words cut deeper than knives. Nora's sobs grew harsher. "Because this child is innocent." But Lila only folded her arms. "Maybe fate is doing us all a favor." The cruelty was unbearable. Nora's vision blurred as she clung to the edge of the bed. The room spun, her strength draining, and then there was a sound. A knock. It wasn't the timid tap of a servant, nor the sharp knock of authority. It was gentle, deliberate. "Mrs. Hale?" A voice called softly from the other side of the door. It was Thomas. Nora's heart lurched. Relief flooded her veins. Lila's eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. She glanced at the door, then back at Nora, hissing under her breath. "Don't you dare say a word about this. If you tell him what just happened, I'll make sure Greg takes that baby from you the second it's born." The venom in her voice made Nora shiver. Another knock. "Nora? It's me. Open the door." Nora stared at Lila, her body shaking. She had a choice: stay silent, protect herself from Lila's threats, or speak and risk everything. Her breath came fast. Her tears blurred her vision. The child inside her kicked, a desperate reminder that this fight wasn't just hers anymore. Lila leaned close, whispering one final time, "Keep quiet, or you'll lose everything." The door handle turned, the room held its breath, and then the door swung open. Thomas stood in the frame, his eyes locking first on Nora, pale and trembling on the floor, then on Lila, looming over her. His jaw tightened, his fists curling. "What's going on in here?" he demanded. Nora opened her mouth. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried enough to shatter everything. "She tried to leave me here when I needed help." The silence that followed was explosive. Thomas's eyes darkened. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with a force that rattled the walls. And for the first time, Lila's smirk disappeared completely. Thomas's presence filled the small guest room like a shield. His broad frame blocked the doorway, his sharp eyes scanning from Nora, pale and trembling on the floor, to Lila standing stiffly, her face caught between arrogance and panic. "What's going on in here?" he demanded again, his tone low but deadly serious. Nora's lips trembled, her words fragile but clear. "I needed help. She pointed at Lila with a shaking hand. "She just stood there. She was going to leave me." Thomas's jaw tightened. He took one slow step forward, his gaze never leaving Lila. "Is that true?" Lila tried to recover her composure, crossing her arms defiantly. "She's exaggerating. I didn't know what was happening. I froze. That's all." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "You froze while a pregnant woman begged you for help?" His voice was colder than the wind howling outside. Lila faltered. For the first time, her confidence looked like a costume she didn't know how to wear anymore. Thomas crouched beside Nora, offering his hand. "Come on, you're not alone." Nora's eyes brimmed with tears, not just from pain, but from relief. She let him steady her, rising shakily to her feet. His hand was warm, grounding, the opposite of Greg's cold indifference. "Thank you," she whispered. He gave a small nod. "Don't thank me for doing what's right." Behind them, Lila scoffed, trying to regain control. "Oh, please, don't make me the villain here. Greg loves me, not her. He chose me. Everyone knows it." Thomas turned his head sharply. "What Greg calls love is nothing but self-indulgence. And aligning yourself with him says more about you than it does about her." Lila's smile faltered. Her voice rose, shrill with desperation. "You think you're so righteous, Thomas? You don't know anything about me." "Then tell me," Thomas replied evenly. "Tell me why you thought humiliating a pregnant woman made you powerful." For a flicker of a moment, fear darted through Lila's eyes. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Nora caught it. That hesitation, that crack. And in that instant, she knew Lila had secrets. Thomas helped Nora back to the bed, then straightened, his presence imposing. "You should leave," he told Lila. "Now, before this gets worse for you." But Lila didn't move. Instead, she laughed. A brittle, ugly laugh. "Worse for me? Oh, Thomas? You think I'm just some little mistress with nothing to lose? You don't know what Greg's promised me. You don't know the leverage I already have." Her words cut through the room like ice. Nora's heart thudded. "Leverage?" she repeated softly. Lila's eyes gleamed with cruel satisfaction. "That's right. Greg has been sloppy. I have proof. Messages, bank transfers, even documents he didn't want anyone to see. If he tries to walk away from me, I'll bury him. And if you think this family empire will stay intact after that, you're more naive than I thought." Thomas's face hardened. "You're blackmailing him." Lila shrugged, unashamed. "I call it strategy. Men like Greg never give unless you take. I've been smart enough to take." Nora's stomach turned. For years, she had believed Greg's betrayal was personal, a failure of love, of loyalty. But this wasn't just about infidelity. This was business. This was corruption. And suddenly, something inside her shifted. Her tears dried. Her back straightened. She looked Lila directly in the eye. "You may think you're smart," she said quietly, "but you've made the same mistake Greg made. You underestimated me." Lila blinked, thrown off by the sudden strength in Nora's voice. "What are you talking about?" Nora rose slowly, one hand still cradling her belly, but her eyes sharp and unflinching. "You think you're the only one with proof? You think Greg's the only one careless with his secrets?" She gestured toward the door, where the lawyer downstairs had already begun unpacking files. "There are documents being reviewed right now. Documents that protect me and expose him." Lila's smirk faltered, replaced by a flash of alarm. Thomas caught it instantly, his lips pressed into a thin line. "What is it you're hiding, Lila?" I'm not hiding anything," she stammered. But Nora shook her head. "Yes, you are. And I'll find it. Whatever it is, it will come out, just like everything else tonight." The silence in the room was suffocating. Then suddenly Lila snapped. Her voice rose, sharp and panicked. "Fine. You want to know? I wasn't just with Greg. I've been meeting with his competitors, sharing information. Deals. Contacts. He thinks he owns me, but I've been playing both sides." Thomas's eyes blazed. "You've been leaking company secrets?" Lila froze, realizing too late what she'd admitted. Nora's breath caught. She hadn't expected Lila to confess so easily. But now the truth was out, and it was explosive. Thomas's voice was steel. "Do you understand what you've done? That's corporate espionage. That's prison time." Panic flickered across Lila's face. I didn't mean." But Nora cut her off, her voice cold, steady. "You meant every word, and now you've just handed me more power than you ever imagined." Lila's face drained of color. Thomas stepped closer, towering over her. "If you had an ounce of sense, you'd walk out of this house right now and never come back." But Nora raised her hand gently. "No, let her stay. Let her walk back downstairs. Let the entire family hear what she just admitted." Lila's eyes widened in horror. "You wouldn't." "Oh, I would," Nora replied. Her voice was calm, but beneath it pulsed a new strength. "Because for the first time tonight, I'm not the one humiliated. You are." Lila's mouth opened, then closed, no words left to defend herself. And just as the tension reached its breaking point, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hall. The door creaked open again. It was Evelyn. Her sharp eyes swept the room, taking in Nora's tear-streaked face, Thomas's rigid stance, and Lila's shaken composure. "What's happening here?" she asked quietly, though her voice carried the weight of command. Nora inhaled deeply, her heart pounding. This was it, the moment to decide whether to reveal everything. She looked at Evelyn, then at Lila, whose face had gone pale with fear. And Nora spoke, her voice clear and unwavering. "She's not just his mistress. She's a traitor." The words dropped like a stone into the still air. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her gaze settling on Lila like a hawk preparing to strike. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, until downstairs the sudden crash of glass shattered it. Voices rose, sharp and urgent. Something was happening below, and it was about to change everything again. The sound of shattering glass from the dining room below echoed like a warning bell through the Hale lodge. Voices rose, sharp, panicked, clashing. Somewhere, Peter's booming tone tried to restore order. But upstairs, the storm was already rewriting its course. Evelyn Hale's piercing gaze locked on Lila, who stood trembling now, her bravado shattered. "A traitor," Nora had declared, and the word hung in the air like a death sentence. Evelyn didn't flinch. Her posture remained regal, her voice quiet but commanding. "You will come downstairs," she told Lila, "and you will answer for this." Lila's lips quivered. You can't make me." Thomas's voice cut in like steel. "She doesn't need to make you. Your own words already condemned you." Nora, still pale from her earlier collapse, slowly rose to her feet, but now there was something different in her eyes. The tears had dried. The trembling had stilled. What remained was a glint of steel she hadn't known she carried. She looked at Lila, her voice calm, almost gentle. "Do you know what the difference is between you and me, Lila? You think power comes from secrets. I know it comes from truth. And tonight, truth is on my side." The younger woman's face drained of color. She turned toward the door, but Evelyn's hand shot out, surprisingly swift, gripping her wrist. "You will face this family," the matriarch hissed. For the first time, Lila looked afraid. Truly afraid. Nora exhaled deeply, steadying herself. She turned to Thomas. "Help me downstairs." He nodded without hesitation, his arms steady as she leaned on him. Every step back down the grand staircase felt like a reclamation. The garlands glittered, the ornaments gleamed. But now, Nora saw them differently. not as decorations of a house that never accepted her, but as silent witnesses to her rise. By the time they reached the dining room, the chaos had stilled into uneasy murmurs. The broken glass lay swept into a corner by a nervous servant. Greg stood at the head of the table, red-faced, gesturing wildly as he tried to explain away the scandal. "This is nothing," he barked. "My wife is hysterical. My brother is meddling. We need to move on." But when Nora entered, leaning on Thomas's arm, the room fell silent. Every eye turned toward her, and for the first time in her life, she did not shrink. She stood tall, her green dress shimmering under the candlelight, her swollen belly a testament not to weakness, but to resilience. Greg's eyes widened. "What are you doing back here?" he demanded. "You should have left quietly. Don't humiliate yourself more than you already have." Nora's lips curved into a faint smile. "You think I came back to humiliate myself? No, Gregory. I came back to finish what I started." She walked forward slowly, releasing Thomas's arm, her hand steady on the table as she reached the head where Greg stood. She did not stop until she was directly across from him. "Sit down," she said softly. Something in her tone, quiet, sure, commanding, cut deeper than any shout. Greg hesitated, his confidence faltering. Peter Hale cleared his throat, his voice gruff but firm. "Listen to her." Greg sank reluctantly into his chair, muttering curses under his breath. Nora turned, her eyes sweeping the room. Tonight was supposed to be about family, about celebrating trust, loyalty, and love. Instead, it has revealed betrayal, greed, and lies. She gestured toward the envelope of divorce papers. "I placed this on the table not to shame anyone, but to reclaim myself. And now, I will tell you all the truth you deserve to hear." The lawyer, standing quietly at the end of the table, stepped forward, opening his briefcase. He laid out documents, each one crisp, official, damning. "Mrs. Hale entrusted me with evidence of Mr. Gregory Hale's financial misconduct," he said. "Funds moved improperly, deals struck under the table, patterns that endanger not only this family's name but its entire empire." Gasps spread across the room. Greg jumped to his feet. "Lies," he shouted. "This is a setup. She's manipulating you all." But Evelyn's sharp voice cut him down. "Sit." And for the first time, Greg obeyed his mother like a chastised child. Nora's voice remained calm. "Greg thought he could betray me and walk away untouched. But his betrayal was not only of me, it was of all of you, of this family, of everything his parents built." Lila, trembling near the doorway, suddenly cried out, "She's lying. She's just bitter." Nora's gaze turned to her, cool and unshaken. "You want proof?" She nodded toward the lawyer. "Tell them what she admitted upstairs." The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "Miss Summers confessed to leaking confidential company information to competitors." A stunned silence swept across the table. Peter's face turned crimson. "Espionage? In my company?" Evelyn's voice dropped to a whisper, cold as steel. "You brought poison into this house, Gregory." Greg's face twisted, panic breaking through arrogance. "No, she's lying. Lila would never." But Lila's own silence betrayed her. Her eyes darted wildly, her lips fumbling for excuses that would not come. Mia gasped. "She admitted it. I heard it myself." The room erupted in murmurs, the weight of scandal crashing down like a tidal wave. Nora, in the center of it all, stood calm and unyielding. She felt the baby kick gently inside her as though reminding her, "This is your fight. Win it." Her voice rose above the noise, steady and clear. "Gregory Hale is not the man you all believed him to be. He is a liar, a cheat, and a traitor. And she pointed at Lila, is not just his mistress. She is a thief who sought to strip this family of everything it owns." Greg lunged forward, his face twisted with rage. "You think you've beaten me, Nora? You're nothing without me. Nothing." But before he could reach her, Thomas stepped in, shoving him back into his chair with a firm hand. "Enough." The room stilled again. Nora's eyes locked on Greg, her voice cutting through the silence like glass. "You made one fatal mistake, Gregory. You thought I was weak." Greg sneered. "You are." Nora leaned closer, her voice low but deadly. "No, I'm the strongest woman you'll ever know, and tonight you'll see just how strong I am." The candles flickered. The family leaned forward, captivated, breathless. And then, from the far end of the table, Evelyn Hale slowly rose to her feet. Her silver hair shimmered in the candlelight, her eyes sharp as blades. She looked directly at her son, and with a voice that carried the weight of generations, she declared, "You are no longer welcome at this table." The room gasped. Greg's face went pale. and Nora, her heart pounding, knew the transformation was complete. She was no longer the silent wife. She was the storm. The dining room was silent, as if the whole house itself held its breath after Evelyn's declaration. "You are no longer welcome at this table," the matriarch had said, and the words struck like thunder. For Gregory Hale, it was the first time in his life that power slipped fully from his grasp. But Nora knew this was only the beginning. She straightened, every eye on her now, not as a woman humiliated, but as the woman who had pulled back the veil. Her hand rested gently on her belly, the quiet strength of a mother radiating from her as she prepared to deliver the blow Greg never saw coming. "Tonight," she said, her voice clear, "you all saw the proof of his betrayal, but you deserve to know what else I've uncovered." Gasps fluttered across the room. Even the younger cousins, usually oblivious, leaned forward in their chairs. Greg leapt to his feet, panic flashing across his face. "Don't you dare, Nora. Don't you dare drag this family through the mud just because you're bitter." But Nora didn't flinch. "This family isn't in the mud because of me. It's because of you." She nodded toward the lawyer, who immediately spread the documents across the table once more. Bank records, contracts, transactions that painted a picture darker than infidelity. "Greg has been siphoning funds from Hale Evergreen Holdings," the lawyer explained. "Shell accounts, offshore transfers, millions unaccounted for." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Peter Hale slammed a fist on the table, so hard the crystal glasses rattled. You dare steal from your own bloodline?" Greg's face flushed crimson. "I built this company. I've worked harder than anyone here." Thomas cut him off coldly. "You've stolen more than you've built." Lila stepped forward, desperation bleeding into her voice. "You can't prove any of this. These are just papers, words on a page." Nora turned to her, calm and unwavering. "You confessed upstairs. You admitted leaking company secrets. You aligned yourself with competitors, thinking no one would hear. But now they all know." All eyes turned to Lila. For the first time, the confident smile vanished entirely. Her lips trembled. "No," she whispered. "She's lying." Mia's voice rang out, steady and certain. "I heard it too." The family gasped again. Evelyn's gaze sharpened like a blade. "Then it's decided. Neither of you belong in this house anymore." Greg laughed bitterly, his arrogance returning in the face of cornered desperation. "You can't erase me. I'm your son. Everything you have was built because of me." Evelyn's reply was ice. "Everything we have was built to spite you." The room trembled with the weight of her words. Nora knew it was time to strike the final chord. She pulled a folded piece of paper from the envelope, something she hadn't revealed yet. She held it high, her voice steady. "This is a transfer of my shares, granted to me legally through provisions Greg overlooked. I own part of this company now, and with Evelyn and Thomas standing with me, Gregory, you have no power left." The silence that followed was deafening. Greg's face twisted in disbelief. "That's impossible. You wouldn't." "Oh, but I did," Nora said softly. "You were too busy chasing her to notice the papers you signed months ago, and now you've signed away the last piece of control you thought you had." The family gasped again, the realization settling in. Nora wasn't just leaving. She was taking her power with her. Greg's hand slammed against the table, rattling the glasses once more. His voice cracked with fury. "You think you've beaten me? This isn't over, Nora. You'll regret this." Nora stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. "The only regret I have is believing you were worthy of me. But now," she gestured around the table, "they see you for who you are, and that truth will haunt you long after I'm gone." Lila, pale and trembling, clutched Greg's arm. "Greg, say something. Fix this." But for the first time, Greg had no words. He pulled his arm away from her with disgust, muttering, "You ruined me." Lila gasped. "Me? You're the one who—" But before she could finish, Evelyn slammed her hand on the table. "Enough. Both of you. Leave. Now." The command was final, unyielding. Greg's chest heaved. His pride warred with his fear. But the truth was clear. He was defeated. Slowly, with his shoulders hunched, he turned toward the door. Lila followed, but not without casting one last venomous glance at Nora. "You think you've won," she hissed. "But this isn't the end. I still have pieces to play." Nora didn't blink. "Then play them. I'll still win." The mistress flinched, her bravado cracking, before slipping out the door after Greg. The family sat stunned, the storm finally breaking into silence. The candles flickered, casting long shadows over faces etched with shock, shame, and at last respect. Thomas turned to Nora, his voice soft. "You've done more for this family tonight than Greg ever did." Evelyn nodded slowly. "You have restored honor. For that, you will always have a place at this table." For the first time, Nora felt the truth settle deep within her. She belonged. Not because of Greg. Not because she married into the Hales. But because she had proven herself worthy, not just to them, but to herself. Her hand brushed over her belly, the child within kicking gently, as though affirming the strength she had finally claimed. The room began to breathe again, the murmur of voices softening into gratitude, into healing. Plates were cleared, wine poured. For the first time all evening, laughter, tentative but real, returned to the air. But just as peace seemed to settle, the front doors of the lodge burst open. Cold wind swept into the room, extinguishing half the candles. A man in a black coat stepped inside, his face grim, his eyes scanning the table. He carried a folder marked with the seal of the federal government. "Gregory Hale," he called into the room. "By order of the state, you are under investigation." The family gasped, the storm rising once more. And Nora, her heart steady now, watched as fate delivered the final blow she had set in motion. The wind howled through the open doorway as the man in the black coat stepped into the dining room. His shoes tracked snow across the polished floor, each step echoing with authority. In his hand, the folder bore the seal of the federal government, an emblem that carried more weight than any Hale fortune could ever buy. The room fell into stunned silence. Greg froze at the head of the table, his face draining of color. Lila clutched his sleeve, her nails digging in, her bravado gone. "Gregory Hale," the agent repeated, his voice sharp as steel, "you are under investigation for financial fraud, tax evasion, and corporate misconduct. Effective immediately, your accounts are frozen, and you are to come with us for questioning." Gasps erupted around the table. Peter Hale rose half out of his chair, his voice booming. "This is outrageous. This is Christmas Eve." But the agent did not flinch. The law does not take holidays. Greg's mouth opened and closed, his arrogance collapsing into desperation. "No, you don't understand. I can fix this. I have connections. I have." Nora's voice cut across his pleas, calm and clear. "You had connections, but you wasted them. And now the truth is here." The agent turned toward her, nodding respectfully. "Mrs. Hale, thank you for your cooperation in providing evidence." The room gasped again, but this time all eyes turned to Nora. Greg's head snapped toward her, his face contorted in fury. You did this? You betrayed me?" Nora met his gaze, her voice steady. "No, Greg, you betrayed yourself. I just refused to hide it." The weight of her words landed with finality. Greg staggered back, collapsing into his chair, his body trembling. For the first time, the man who had lorded his power over her looked small. Pathetic. Lila's panic grew. "You can't just take him away. He's innocent until proven guilty. You'll ruin everything." The agent's eyes turned cold. "We already have enough evidence to build the case. And as for you, Miss Summers, we advise you not to leave the city. Your involvement in leaking company secrets has been documented." Lila gasped, her face straining of all color. No, you can't." "Yes," Nora interrupted softly, her voice like velvet wrapped around a dagger. "They can, because you admitted it, and because the truth doesn't disappear just because you don't like it." Lila's body shook as she turned on Greg. "This is your fault. You told me I'd be safe." Greg shoved her hand off his arm. "You ruined me." The two of them, once united in arrogance, now turned on each other like cornered animals. Their voices rose, sharp and bitter, each blaming the other. The Hale family watched in stunned silence. The perfect image of power that Greg had tried to maintain crumbled before their eyes. Evelyn, regal as ever, finally rose to her feet. Her voice was low, but it carried authority that silenced the entire room. "Enough. Both of you have shamed this family for the last time. You will leave this house tonight. Not as heirs, not as guests, but as disgraced traitors." Her words struck with the weight of final judgment. The agents moved forward. Greg tried to resist, but his struggle was weak, his pride broken. They clasped his wrists in cuffs, the metallic click echoing like a bell tolling the end of an era. Lila stumbled backward, her eyes wild. "Wait. You can't arrest me, I was promised." The agent's hand closed firmly around her arm. "Promises don't matter when the law is involved." Her scream echoed through the halls as she was dragged toward the door. Greg's curses followed, bitter, desperate, but powerless. The heavy doors slammed shut behind them, leaving the family in silence. The storm outside raged, but inside it was still. Nora stood in the center of it all, her hand resting gently over her belly. The woman who had entered the evening as the silent, underestimated wife now stood as the force that had dismantled a cheater, exposed a mistress, and preserved a legacy. Evelyn turned to her, her eyes softer now, glistening with something almost like pride. "You have shown strength I did not expect," she admitted. "You fought not only for yourself, but for the future of this family. For that, I am grateful." Thomas stepped closer, his voice steady. "You saved us, Nora, and you saved yourself. Don't forget that." The family murmured in agreement, respect replacing doubt in their eyes. Nora, once the outsider, now stood at the very heart of their approval. She exhaled slowly, her chest loosening from months of weight. The baby within her kicked again, gentle, steady, as if reminding her that her journey was not just for herself, but for the life she carried. Yet even in triumph, Nora felt the exhaustion wash over her. She lowered into her chair, steadying herself. Evelyn placed a hand on her shoulder, warm and grounding. "Rest, child. Tonight you won." But deep in Nora's heart, she knew it wasn't over. Because men like Greg didn't vanish quietly, and women like Lila, desperate, cunning, wouldn't stop until they dragged someone else down with them. As the fire crackled in the hearth, the family slowly began to piece back the night. Servants cleared dishes, cousins whispered. Mia brought Nora a glass of warm water. Peace returned, fragile but real. Then another knock, sharp, sudden, echoing through the vast halls like a warning. The family froze, eyes darting to the door. The agent had already left. Greg and Lila were gone. Who else could it be? Thomas moved first, his steps careful, deliberate. He opened the heavy wooden door. On the threshold stood a courier, drenched in snow, holding a sealed envelope. "For Mrs. Nora Hale," he said. Thomas took it, his brow furrowed, then handed it to her. Nora broke the seal with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Her eyes scanned it once, twice, her breath catching in her throat. The message was short, brutal. "You may have won tonight, but this isn't over. I always play the long game." The room tilted, the shadows deepened, and Nora realized Greg wasn't finished, not by a long shot. The envelope still trembled in Nora's hand, the ink of Greg's chilling message burning into her mind. "You may have won tonight, but this isn't over. I always play the long game." The words should have filled her with fear. Once they would have. Once she would have curled inward, terrified of what came next. But tonight she only felt resolve. She folded the note carefully, placing it back into the envelope. When she looked up, the entire Hale family was watching her, waiting for her to break again, waiting for the tears. But none came. "I won't let him haunt me anymore," she said softly, yet every word carried through the room. "He doesn't control me. Not tonight, not ever again." Evelyn nodded, her silver hair shimmering in the firelight. "That is the voice of a woman who has survived the storm." Thomas stepped closer, his expression calm but protective. "We'll keep you safe, Nora. Whatever Greg tries, he'll fail. You've already taken his power." And for the first time in months, Nora believed it. The days that followed unfolded like a transformation. The federal investigation moved swiftly. Evidence poured in, contracts, bank transfers, testimonies, every piece confirming Greg's corruption. Lila, desperate to save herself, turned on him, providing investigators with details he thought she'd never dare to reveal. The mighty Gregory Hale, once untouchable, now faced headlines that branded him the fallen son and betrayal of the Hales. Nora didn't hide from those headlines. She walked into the city with her head held high, her belly round with new life, and discovered that the world no longer looked at her with pity. They looked at her with respect. The whispers had changed. "That's her, the one who stood up to him. She's stronger than anyone thought. She didn't just survive, she won." Each word was a balm to wounds long hidden, wounds Greg had cut with his cruelty and arrogance. But it wasn't only public opinion that shifted. Within the Hale family, Nora found a place she never thought possible. Evelyn, once distant, began inviting her for tea, speaking not of money or reputation, but of motherhood, of resilience, of what it meant to endure. Mia became a sister more than an in-law, fussing over baby clothes and nursery colors. Even Peter, though gruff and slow to change, began to treat her with respect, admitting one evening by the fire, "You've done more for this family's name than Gregory ever did." And Thomas, steady, watchful Thomas, was always near. He never overstepped, never pushed, but in every quiet moment he was there, holding open doors, walking her to her car, listening when the shadows of doubt crept back. He never said the words, but his presence spoke louder than any declaration. "You are not alone anymore." Nora thrived. She returned part-time to nursing, reminding herself of who she had been before Greg's world swallowed her whole. The clinic welcomed her with open arms, patients trusting her calm voice, her steady hands. And as her belly grew, so did her confidence, her joy. When the baby finally came, a daughter with eyes as bright as morning, Nora wept, not from fear, but from gratitude. She named her Hope, because that was what she had carried all along, even when it felt lost. The Hale family gathered in the hospital room, their eyes shining as they looked at the newest member of their bloodline. Evelyn cradled the infant gently, whispering, "She will never know the weakness of her father, only the strength of her mother." Nora's heart swelled. Months passed. Greg's trial began, splashed across every paper. He tried to smear Nora, tried to paint himself as the victim. But the evidence was too strong, his lies too tangled. The jury found him guilty on multiple counts. His empire crumbled. His name became a warning rather than a crown. Lila disappeared from headlines, her once bright future reduced to a cautionary tale. Whispers suggested she fled the city, but Nora didn't care anymore. Lila's chapter in her life was closed. On the day Greg was sentenced, Nora stood outside the courthouse with Hope in her arms. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but she ignored them all. She looked at the baby in her arms and whispered, "We are free." And she was. The following Christmas, 1 year after the night everything shattered, Nora returned to the Hale Lodge. The house glowed with warmth, laughter echoing through the halls. This time, she was not a guest on edge, not an outsider waiting to be judged. She was the heart of it all. Her daughter cradled by cousins, her seat at the table secured not by Greg's name, but by her own strength. When Evelyn rang the brass bell, the family bowed their heads for prayer. But before Pastor Jonah could speak, Evelyn gestured to Nora. "Tonight," she said, her voice carrying through the room, "the first toast belongs to her, to the woman who reminded us all that truth is stronger than lies and dignity outlives disgrace." Nora rose slowly, her daughter in her arms, her heart full. She looked around the table, the family who had once doubted her, the house that had once felt like a prison, the future that now stretched before her like a gift. Her voice was steady, strong, radiant, to hope, to truth, and to never letting anyone tell you you're not enough. The glasses clinked, the fire roared, and in that moment, Nora knew. She had not just survived betrayal, she had turned it into her greatest victory. Her story wasn't one of weakness, but of rebirth. Her daughter cooed softly in her arms, and Nora smiled, whispering into the child's ear, "We did it." Outside, snow fell gently across the lodge, soft and silent, as though the world itself was blessing the new chapter she had written. The scars of betrayal remained, but they no longer defined her. Nora was free, and stronger than ever. So that's how our story ends, my dear friends. Nora, once broken and humiliated, found her strength, spoke her truth, and walked away with dignity, love, and new life. If you're still here with me right now, it means something in this story touched you. Maybe it reminded you of your own struggles. Maybe it reminded you of a moment you felt unseen, unheard, or underestimated. You see, life has a way of testing us in ways we never imagine. Betrayal, heartbreak, disappointment, they are part of being human. But what defines us is not the pain itself, but how we choose to respond. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Nora's journey is proof of that. She couldn't control Greg's betrayal, but she could control her response. She refused to live as a victim. She stood, even when her knees shook, and chose truth over silence. And isn't that a lesson for all of us? We may not face a Christmas dinner scandal or a public betrayal, but in our daily lives we face smaller battles, at work, in relationships, even in the quiet battles inside our own minds. The question is, will we give up, or will we rise? Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The obstacle is the way." What feels like the end may, in fact, be the beginning of our greatest transformation. So tonight, let Nora's story remind you. You are stronger than you think. You are worth more than the lies others tell you. And you are capable of creating a future that no one can take away. If this story spoke to you, my wonderful friends, I ask you, like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe so you can stay with us for more stories that touch the heart. Because here we don't just tell stories, we heal together.